It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying, by rayrae118. Chapter 9. As Harry soon discovered, not even the stern Professor McGonagall was exempt from that craze that seemed to envelop the females of their species whenever shopping came into the equation. He watched bemused as she led him and Sirius to the juniors' clothing section and began pulling clothes off the racks. Sirius immediately joined in, putting down some of her selections as she rejected some of his. Harry was surprised they actually seemed to have a good idea of what to choose, considering one was a relatively older female and the other had been in prison for 12 years. It was only 12 minutes later when they were approached by an employee who asked them if they needed any help. Minerva looked up from the clothes and nodded. Yes, thank you. My son and grandson here have need of a whole new wardrobe. The house was recently destroyed in a fire, and I'm afraid I'm a little uncertain of the current fashion trends. Perhaps you could do better? The employee nodded, smiling. I'm very sorry for what happened. Hopefully no one was hurt? They all shook their heads, trying not to smile. The woman continued. My name is Shelley, and from the looks of it, you've had a pretty good start. Are there any particular styles you're interested in? Harry looked a little out of his depth. Truthfully, he had never been clothes shopping before. Actually, he'd never been any kind of shopping before unless it was for school. He shrugged a little helplessly, glancing at his godfather before answering. Comfortable, I guess. I go to a boarding school with uniforms, so I don't need a whole lot. He was cut off by Minerva. He needs a full wardrobe. She was adamant. Jeans and t-shirts for day-to-day wear, some nicer slacks and trousers, a few button-down shirts, pyjamas, underwear and undershirts, socks, belts, clothes, shoes, perhaps a suit jacket or two, should an occasion where he need it arise. Shelley nodded, her eyes lighting up at getting to play dress-up with the young man. Fashion truly was her passion. The commission she would make on this sale was also pleasing to think about, but she was more than eager to help what seemed like a nice family bounce back after a horrible tragedy. Wasting no time, she waded into the racks of clothes, pulling a few pair of jeans and holding it up before deciding it wouldn't work before putting it back, choosing something else. Nodding decisively, she added it to the cart they had. She chose a few more pairs of trousers before moving on to the shirts. Studying the younger man, she focused on his eyes. Greens and dark blues are definitely your colour, I think, she decided. You're definitely an autumn. She paused by a maroon button-up shirt and added it to the pile. Earthy tones, she muttered, before doubling the size of their clothing pile within 2 minutes. When there was no more room in the cart, she led them to the fitting room. Now I want you to try all those on. Come out here and show us, she informed him in a no-nonsense voice that reminded him scarily of Minerva. Strange, since she couldn't be more than 10 years older than him, and therefore at least 40 years younger than the Transfiguration Professor. He nodded mutely and accepted the pile of clothing, locking the door behind him. The pile diminished quite rapidly, and they were left with about half the clothes on the keep stack. Shelley was quite busy putting the discarded clothes back and bringing more to try on. She would run a critical eye over what he was trying on and then make her choices known quite firmly. Minerva and Sirius, recognising her experience, were quite happy to let her decide. They quickly had a stockpile of jeans, casual shirts, and moved on to the dressier clothing next. Harry preferred the semi-casual button-up shirts to anything fancier, and Shelley seemed to agree with his choices, asking him what he thought of the colours or styles. Harry thought he was doing quite well, considering this was his first time doing this. Shelley smiled at his next outfit, a dark green button-up over a grey t-shirt with dark grey jeans. Very nice, she approved. This one's going to be a lady killer, I know it. Sirius laughed at Harry's discomfort, but it was Minerva who made the mortification complete. Oh, he's already taken, I think, she said with a decided smirk that made Harry think she had been taking lessons from the Marauders. Sirius's interest was piqued, and Minerva elaborated. You should have seen how close he was with a certain Ginevra Weasley at the end of the term. Harry blushed right down to his toes, while Sirius just looked surprised. Arthur and Molly's girl? At Minerva's nod, he looked up at his godson, approving. Well then, let's keep this moving, shall we? You have a young lady to impress. He was definitely bringing this up later, whenever they could speak freely. He made a mental note to have the talk soon. He doubted that whale of an uncle had done it. Harry was growing quite tired by the time they deemed him outfitted with enough clothing. At that point, they moved on to the other necessities. Shelley looked over him critically and then doubled his mortification when she decided, boxers, louder enough for everyone to hear. He added several packs of underwear and undershirts to the cart, and Shelley led Harry to pick out a few belts that he liked, approving of his choices, which made him happy. He was learning. Socks quickly followed into the cart, and then it was time for shoes. Here Sirius joined in, and it didn't take too long for them each to have several new pairs of shoes. Some were rhyming, dress up, and Minerva even let him have a pair of Converse, though she herself couldn't see the allure. But it made Harry happy, so she was more than willing to oblige. Finally, Harry was done. Grabbing a second cart, Shelley led them to the men's clothing section, where they repeated the process for Sirius. He had a much better idea of what he wanted, so it didn't take nearly as long for his wardrobe to be complete. Shortly after that, they were checking out. Harry gulped as the total was added up, but Minerva didn't comment as she handed over a square of plastic. Harry was confused as to why the Transfiguration Professor would even know what a credit card was, let alone have one, but he waited until they were outside back in the same alley and shrinking down all their bags before he asked. Minerva smiled. "It was your mother's idea," she admitted. "Coming from two magical parents, I was unfamiliar with the many recent developments in the Muggle world. Your mother informed me of the use of credit cards, and how they didn't need to carry around bags of money in order to do some shopping. She helped me set up an account with the Royal Bank of Scotland so that I wouldn't have a way of living in the Muggle world should it be needed. I have not used it very often, but some things are easier, or better, to get in the Muggle world." Harry nodded, not trusting his voice to speak. It stiffened only for a moment, but quickly relaxed at the embrace she gave him. "Your mother was an amazing woman, Harry," she told him kindly. "She always saw the magic in the world, even the Muggle parts of it. She was a kind and compassionate soul, and I see so much of her in you." Sirius nodded his agreement, smiling. Harry truly had the best parts of his parents in him. When they had collected themselves a bit, Minerva led them towards a hardware store that she knew was nearby. Here she told Harry and Sirius to pick out all the colours they wanted to paint their rooms. Sirius immediately decided on a light blue, but Harry dithered, unsure of what choice to make. His pleading eyes sought out Sirius, who was looking through the various colour options. "What's your favourite colour?" he asked his godson. Harry thought about it. He was about to say he wasn't sure when the image of a fiery young girl popped into his mind. He imagined the way the light caught her red tresses, and he blushed. Sirius, of course, recognised that look. He had seen it every time he had caught James thinking about Lily. He shook his head, chuckling. "What is it with Potters and redheads?" he asked rhetorically, and Harry looked up at him sharply. Sirius just laughed harder. "I'm guessing you're thinking red, right?" Harry nodded, embarrassed. Sirius grinned. "Well, I think red might be a little overpowering for the walls, but our next stop is the department store. So how about we get some nice red sheets there and focus on something a bit more neutral for the walls?" He reached out to the section of colours and picked out a light grey. It had a silvery sheen to it with a warm undertone. "Does this work?" Harry looked at the colour his godfather had chosen and immediately approved. He nodded, his face lighting up with a smile, and Sirius took their choices over to the counter. After the paint was mixed and handed over, they went over to the promised department store. This place was very different from Harrod's. Though it also sold clothing, it was much larger, and included sections of bedding, bath, kitchen, and even furniture. McGonagall looked at the two men she was in the company of and smiled. "Pick whatever you want," she informed them, laughing a little, and Sirius immediately dragged his godson over to the bedding department, filling their cart with several sheets and blankets, dark blue for himself and reds and maroons for Harry. Then Sirius led him over to look at some room decorations, picking out a few posters and pictures, some decorations he thought would look good in his and Harry's rooms. They added some towels next before going over to the personal hygiene section, stocking up on toothbrushes, toothpaste, razors, and the like. When they were about done, they headed to the checkout counter, when Harry stopped by the furniture section. Minerva looked at him. "Was there something you wanted?" she asked. Harry nodded, a little embarrassed. "A bookshelf?" he inquired hesitantly, as if expecting her to say no. Minerva blinked and then nodded her approval, without further ado heading for the aisle in question, and began looking through their options. Harry seemed to like the shelf in a nice cherry wood colour. It had 5 shelves, and it would match the other furniture already in his room. Sirius immediately added the box to his cart, and headed to the checkout with no further delays. Finished with their shopping in the Muggle world, Minerva hesitated at Sirius. We all need to head back to Diagon Alley for a few things. It might be best if you were to return home. Even with the glamours, it's not safe." Sirius looked about to protest, but instead glanced over at Harry. He had made a promise to his godson to always be there, and that meant not taking any unnecessary risks. After all, he should set a good example for the boy, right? He just nodded and took all of their shrunken down purchases. He hugged Harry tightly and smiled back at them. "Give me a few casual robes, will you? And maybe a Quidditch poster or two?" Harry and Minerva nodded, and with a pop, Sirius disappeared, and Minerva led her young charge down the street towards the entrance to the Wizarding Shopping District. The Leaky Cauldron was thankfully mostly empty. It had been too late for lunch and too early for dinner. Tom simply nodded at the Hogwarts professor as they made their way to the back alley and the entrance to the alley. Minerva immediately led Harry to Madame Malkin's, insisting that he needed some casual robes and formal robes to add to his new wardrobe. Harry just sighed and nodded, hoping they would finish soon enough. Madame Malkin was eager to help out the boy who lived, chatting with her former professor all the while, as they pinned and fitted several robes of varying colours, dark blues, blacks, greys and greens. Most were casual, but Minerva insisted on a few formal robes as well. Harry was, after all, the heir to an ancient and noble house, and he needed to be able to look the part when the situation called for it. Soon enough they were done, and Minerva made the plans to come back in a few hours to retrieve the clothing. She also placed an order for some robes for Sirius, given the madam his sizes and several pre-approved colours. Their next shop was Quality Quidditch Supplies, where Harry enthusiastically jumped into the various wares. Minerva just chuckled and sat back to watch as he picked out a few posters of various Seeker moves and teams. He wasn't sure what Sirius would like, but he figured he couldn't go wrong with a few popular teams, so he added the English, Irish and Bulgarian national teams to the pile. He hesitated when he saw a practice snitch, a ball used to train Seekers. It could be set to fly at a certain specific distance and come back with a command. He picked it up and looked at it wistfully, but decided it was too expensive and he couldn't let Aunt Minerva spend that much on him. He was surprised then, when after setting it down, it was picked up again immediately by Minerva, who handed it back to him with a soft smile. "I said, anything you want," she chastised him. Harry looked rebellious, so Minerva adopted her take-no-nonsense professor look. "Harry, I don't have any grandchildren of my own to spoil, so you'll just have to get used to this." Her expression softened and Harry sagged, defeated. He continued looking around the store, choosing a snitch-shaped pillow and a broomstick wall decor that could be activated once attached to the wall to fly around. He glanced through the team robes and t-shirts and made a mental note to come back by the end of the summer to pick up some cannons-related thing for Ron for Christmas. He looked back at his guardian. "I'm done," he called to her. Minerva smiled and led him over to the counter, where she paid for everything before heading to their next stop. Minerva knew that such a fine bookshelf as she had just bought for her charge needed to be filled, and the fact that he had asked her for one told her he would be putting those books to good use. So she led him over to Flourish and Blots, where Harry's eyes truly lit up like a Christmas tree. She watched with a fond smile as he moved methodically from section to section, seeming to take to heart her rule about not underperforming in class anymore. She simply followed with a basket, quickly becoming grateful that it had been charmed to be feather-light. Harry added books on transfiguration, charms, defence, runes, warding, arithmancy, several different history books, nothing on goblin rebellions, she noted with an internal smile, and a few on politics, which she approved of wholeheartedly. When they came to the potions section, Harry stopped, a little nervous. He had been truly looking forward to that subject until the first class. He knew Snape would never treat him fairly, but he wanted to do well in the subject, even if the professor was biased. He glanced over at Minerva, who simply picked out a few guides with a knowing look. She had been hearing complaints about the potions master for years, and as much as she wanted to take the overgrown bat to task, it was up to Dumbledore to rein in his professor. Harry looked at all the titles and knew immediately that they would help him should he, from the first year. It would be his broomstick that a potions guide, beginner's guide, a complete guide to potions, a textbook of tables, potion ingredients, why they react the way they do, and best of all, The book he was fairly certain had to be written by a Muggle-born or someone with knowledge of the Muggle world. Potion making for dummies would be more help to him than any class Snape would ever teach. Minerva also added a 4th-year textbook to the pile. They would return later in the summer to get his school supplies, but she knew this was a subject that he would need a lot of help on, so it wouldn't hurt to get the book early. The employee at the counter raised an eyebrow at the quantity of books, but checked them out without questioning a word, thanking them for their business, and he handed over the bag full of books. This too was charmed to be almost weightless, a true blessing considering the library they had just purchased. By this time Harry was truly done in, so Minerva led him back to Madame Malkin's to pick up their road purchases before heading to the Cauldron, where they took the flue back to McGonagall Castle. It was time for dinner, and they still needed to set up all they had purchased. End of chapter 9. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I actually really liked this chapter because Harry has had such a hard life and it's nice to see people spoiling him. So have a good day, night, or whatever time you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. Hope you enjoyed this again. Bye!